Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our series of experiences in digital education. Many apologies if any of you logged on earlier. We seem to have had a little bit of ambiguity about start time, but I hope that will have given you enough time to meditate on some really challenging questions for the great presenters we have for you today. This series, as many of you will know, is a monthly event, and it was designed really to accompany all of us through a year of quite challenging transitions, which presents a number of challenges to all of us, but also opportunities. And I think reaching out to this audience today in different parts of the world is one of the opportunities that we are taking advantage of in this respect. Today's session is what will digital assessment look like in 2021? Clearly a really important subject for all of us at the moment. And we're joined by three experts that my colleague and the chair for today, Dr Linda Amrane-Cooper, will introduce to you in a moment. But just to introduce the hosts, this is the University of London event, and it's a partnership between the Centre for Distance Education based in London, the University of Goldsmiths, Goldsmiths University of London, and the University of London Institute in Paris, where I'm sitting today. So I will now hand over to Linda and ask her to start the session. But I will remind you that there's another session coming up on March the 4th on inclusive online practice, and we hope many of you will be back with us for that. Linda, over to you.
Hello, welcome. Lovely to know that there are so many people here, and again apologies for a slight miscommunication, I think, about the start time. Okay, so we've got a fantastic panel with us today. Stylianos and Alan are CDE fellows working with the University of London, and they've been particularly involved in the evaluation of the University of London's work around assessment that started last summer. So it's very exciting that they're going to be able to report on that and really draw out the implications for the future. And then Simon from UCL is going to talk to us about the work that UCL is doing in thinking about this coming summer's assessment and moving forward. We can't negate the incredible changes that have happened in our personal lives and in our lives working within higher education. And we know the challenges that our staff and students have faced. So we hope that we'll be able to pick up on some of those issues as we go forward. And I'm delighted to see there's already a very active discussion going on in the Q&A panel. So we look forward to trying to address some of those questions, or at least engaging with some of those questions. So I'm going to start, if I may, by inviting Alan and Stylianos to start the presentation, and then we'll have an opportunity for some questions. Thank you.
Good afternoon,
over
everybody.
to you, Alan and Stylianos.
Great, thank you very much. So that's a slide with Stylianos. Can we have the first slide for the presentation, Eric?
Yes, you need to turn your camera on.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Alan,
Okay.
you may want to speak a little louder if you can, or lean in a bit closer. Thank you.
Okay, I'll do that. Good afternoon, everybody. Great pleasure to be with you. And this presentation will be given by my colleague Stylianos, Hatzipanagos and myself on the University of London's move to online assessment in 2020. And while the two of us are making the presentation, there were in fact three of us leading the evaluation, which we'll be talking about, and the third person was Linda Amrane-Cooper, who is acting as moderator today. So Linda was certainly a senior member of this team, but there were also a range of other colleagues in the University of London system who contributed to this evaluation. Too many to mention now, but Stylianos and I are representatives rather than sole leaders here. So just about 11 months ago, the University of London examination machine, with all its partners in some 180 countries around the world, was purring along like a Singer sewing machine, preparing to offer a huge number of examinations in May-June 2020. And this is the story of what happens next. Next slide, please, Eric. In the third week of March in the UK, it became clear that the pandemic was hugely serious, and the government in Westminster, with governments in 3 other countries of the UK, closed down all schools, colleges and universities. And it became clear to the University of London that this was going to be a global phenomenon, not just a UK phenomenon, and that fairly soon afterwards it was decided that all examinations were going to have to be moved online. This was before, I think it's fair to say, we knew exactly how that was going to be done. There were 35,000 students booked to take 110,000 examinations in 180 countries in 600 examination centres run by the teaching centres and other partners in the University of London system. So a hugely complex operation with an enormous number of questions asked by that operation in terms of student hardware and download capabilities, the management of examination formats, the questions about academic integrity that will be asked. But the University of London had no option, because it was simply not possible to bring people together in examination halls in so wide a range of countries in just a few months' time. And a great range of online formats were invented by program boards for programs of study with more or less successful outcomes. And this evaluation was commissioned at that time, at that early stage, in order that the University of London could find out how well everything had gone. So this is the story of that evaluation. Next slide, please, Eric. And this gives you the headlines of the work that we did, which we reported to the University of London's senior leadership team in December. The first thing to say was that there was no barrier to access. And in fact, the number of students choosing to sit examinations in 2020 went up slightly. This is an enormously important finding, because of course the University of London works in a whole range of countries, rich, poor, middle income, and there are not only questions of hardware, whether students had adequate hardware, but also, and perhaps more pressingly, questions of download, broadband, which is very patchy in a lot of places around the world, as people participating in this webinar will know. But this was a very, very important finding, which we made through student survey, that there was no barrier to access. And as importantly, 70% of students believed they demonstrated their learning with online assessment. So in other words, the great majority of students felt that they had been examined fairly and effectively. And then the third bullet point here, very important for the future, is that 66% of students would like online assessment to continue in the future. And of course, at the stage we were doing in the evaluation, we had no idea what the situation was going to be in May, June 2021, although we do now. But the last point on this slide is important, which is that some programs had noticeably higher pass rates, not all by any means, but some programs had noticeably higher pass rates. So an issue which needs drilling down into an investigation. And if you move into the next slide, Stylianos will take on the story.
Hello, everybody. Thanks, Alan. There are a few other important issues, aspects of these evaluations we need to talk about, because we want you to give you a holistic view of how this evaluation went. So I'm going to talk briefly about online proctoring, because in recent debates in the higher education sector about this move to online assessment by institutions, online proctoring and online invigilation is something that has featured, was quite visible and quite important discussions. So the thing I'm going to say in relation to this project, that personation, i.e. the the fact that somebody assuming the identity of another person was unknown but not controlled. There are a few related issues in relation to online proctoring. One has to do with this aspect of privacy, which seems to be very important for students. Online proctoring via third party, in our case, was only used in the University of London worldwide only for a few programs, and did not work for students in these few locations and circumstances you used it. However, it's important to say that in the context of online proctoring, there are some very important issues of acceptability for these students, for some students, because it's seen as impinging on student privacy, because the system collects information about a particular student, including recording. Also, online proctoring seems to, in recent discussions, seems to be part of this antithesis between online proctoring and authentic assessment. And quite often, this seems to be going forward. It's a choice that some institutions need to make. So design an assessment, for instance, for supporting academic integrity appears to be as the opposite pole of online proctoring. There is also the challenge of authenticity there. And what is important there is how to support academic integrity and to make sure that this is respected and is not an issue in online examinations. Eric, could you please move to the next slide? So the other aspect I would like to talk about is we interviewed program directors, and I would like to give you a concise idea about the program director views. So in most courses, exams remain the predominant assessment format in this move to online assessment. The program directors we talked to cited as reasons for this. First of all, the perceived academic rigor of the summative assessment process, the recognition of the exams by professional bodies, regional regulators, as a rigorous assessment format, and third, the impact that any radical change might have on confidence in the quality of degrees, something that was brought forward in the student data we collected, both from the survey and from interviewing students. These changes to assessment included adoption of alternative forms of assessment, mainly coursework, in some cases submitting online to complement or to replace the exam. Formative assessment, when adopted, served the purpose of allowing students to practice ahead of the exam, and in most cases were optional. There was support offered to the students before the online exam, and this included webinars, training, workshops, revision forums, all of them initiatives to allow the students to practice ahead of the exam, and also to achieve clarity about format and process of the online assessment. In terms of the content of the exams, changes in most cases consisted of moving to open book exams, redesigning questions to discourage plagiarism, and the program directors referred as well, very interested in my view, to self-plagiarism from students' previous assessed work. The rationale for this change of content of the exams was to reduce reliance on rote learning and to introduce an element of flexibility and also ease anxiety by establishing windows of submission of variable length, because that was the approach that the university used. There were variable, depending on the program or a particular discipline or subject, there were variable windows of submission, meaning that the student may have windows of submission in order to return their work, download the work, and this could be from 2 to 3 hours up to in some cases 7 days. While some very important reported that the move to online assessment would be temporary and they would like to return to previous assessment methods post-pandemic, a big number of them reported that they would be happy to continue the online exams. An interesting other aspect of in how these programs addressed assessment was that in a few programs, changes to assessment were accelerated by the pandemic. So this rapid change to online exams, although challenging from an organizational point of view, has made visible some of the limitations of the exams, and also very interesting, I think, enabled enhancements to student learning that might otherwise have taken much longer to achieve. This might have been the silver lining of this terrible pandemic, allowing institutions, program teams, and program directors to revisit their assessment repertoire, to put it this way, and look what could work under these particular circumstances. Eric, could you please move to the next slide? The other body of significant stakeholders views I would like to report on before I give the before Alan continues with some very important thoughts on the overall move to online assessment is the examiner attitudes from this survey. So we targeted examiners, markers, and we asked them about their views. So the majority of the examiners seem to welcome the move to mark-typed examination scripts. There was an obvious but very significant reason for that. They prefer to mark-typed examination scripts rather than handwritten scripts, and the former tend to be more legible and easy to access. They refer to some of the technical difficulties that they faced while they were doing that. Another important aspect that I would like to talk about is that over half, 51% of the examiners indicated that the move to online assessment helped the students to achieve higher academic standards in submitting work than previously. And I will give you a very practical example of that. When somebody types an exam rather than handwriting, they have the opportunity to go back to this typed exam, edit an answer, and make it better, more organized, and more logical, more coherent. So that's a good example of how an online assessment could help a student to achieve higher academic standards. The other thing I would like to talk about is that over half of these examiners believe that the online assessment had led to a change for the worse in respect of plagiarism. So there were academic integrity issues that they had encountered during the marking process. Very important, we asked the examiners to identify the two top adjustments they would like to see to minimize assessment offenses. And the top two responses were for the exams to be invigilated, hence the previous discussion on online proctoring, to minimize assessment offenses. And second is to redesign the assessment, so for the exams to be converted into open book format. The open text comments called for greater levels of student training on academic integrity and to avoid plagiarism and collusion. Eric, could you please move to the next slide? Alan, over to you.
Thank you, Stylianos. So moving towards the end of our presentation, we made our report, as Stylianos and I have set out for you, to the senior leadership team of the University of London. Linda, in fact, represented it at that meeting. And the big questions at that time, so that was back in December, was how on earth do we plan for 2021? And is there an option to go back to the classic exam hall experience for everybody? That question has in fact subsequently been answered, because at that stage, in the UK at least, there was a feeling of optimism that the pandemic was coming under close management, that it was on the retreat. And of course, that has very cruelly, that hope has very cruelly been crushed. And it's now clear that we can't go back in May, June 2021 in all the 180 or so countries around the world to assuming that students will be able to gather again in classic exam halls, even if that were desirable. And I think one of the questions which we all face taking part in this webinar as educators is what progress have we made in the digital transition, accelerated by this very unwelcome pandemic, that we would actually want to retain? Rather than say, let's go back to where we were, how do we plan rationally and say, well, where have we got to that's actually valuable?
1 minute left, please.
Okay, just coming to an end. We're clear that we won't be going back to the classic exam hall experience in 2021 next year in the University of London system. We are, however, going to constrain the number of examination modes and formats. So there'll be fewer modes and formats, which will make the management operationally and the management in terms of academic integrity much easier. And it's our view, and I think it's the view of Stylianos and I quite firmly, that the best solutions to academic integrity lie in assessment design, lie in thinking how we design the tasks for assessment, and in particular, how we rethink learning outcomes, rather than reaching for technological solutions such as Turnitin or such as online proctoring. Not that there may be no place for those at all, but academic design of assessment is really the way forward. Eric, last slide, please. So, just to rehearse some of our conclusions for your consideration, students do not present a barrier in terms of their attitudes to online assessment. We didn't know that 11 months ago, we know that now. This crisis has accelerated change and rethink of assessment pedagogy. There will be some value out of this terrible pandemic, because I think many programme leaders and programme teams have thought seriously about assessment, in particular end of course, end of module assessment, in ways that they may not have done for some time. But very importantly, grade inflation and academic integrity must receive more attention, and we believe redesigning assessment is going to be the biggest help towards that. So I'll come to a conclusion there. Linda, thank you, and we'll return to you as chair.
Thank you very much, both of you. Absolutely excellent. And in fact, you've covered pretty much everything that has come up on the very avid question panel. So thank you to all of our participants for putting forward their questions and for interacting with each other. It's very valuable there. We've got a bit of time now for some questions, particularly to you both, Alan and Stylianos. So if you want to keep your camera on, Alan, that's fine. So there were quite a few questions, and I'm going to paraphrase around this question of authentic assessment. And in your summing up there, Alan, you made some comments. You talked a little bit about proctoring and Turnitin, which were two other major themes in the question panel. So really, I think, can you develop some of the things that you've said around authentic assessment to limit plagiarism and assessment offences? Is there more that you can say there? Because I think there's a lot of interest in that area. Alan, you're on mute at the moment.
Stylianos, do you want to go ahead, or do you want, yes?
Yeah, it's authentic assessment is the big issue, and as I mentioned earlier on, sometimes it comes in as an opposite, as an exact opposite of the online invigilation is the way forward. To give you an example of an authentic assessment, so somebody that's where the introduction of an open book exams comes in. So adopting an open book exam is a good way forward towards authentic assessment, because it allows students to be assessed on something which is an application or interpretation, a reflection of what they read in a textbook, what they learned while attending a lecture or participate in a seminar. So the authentic aspect of that has to do with, as one of our students said, the open book exam for me, he said, I think very important, solved a very important contradiction. Previously, I had to replicate, regurgitate information from a textbook. And this was in contrast with some of the formative assessment I was doing throughout the year. Whereas now I have to participate in a similar activity, which allows me to apply knowledge I learned to a particular professional, to a particular situation, which I'm sure will be very useful for me in a professional, practical setting.
That's a really good example. Alan, did you want to add to that?
Well, I'd only add to that, I think, by saying that in the interviews that Stylianos conducted with a number of program directors, I think it would be fair to say that this pandemic and the move to online assessment had initiated a fresh examination of what end of course assessment was for. And I think if we think again about what it is we're wanting to judge in final assessment, what it is we want to assure ourselves that students have shown they have learned, then there's nothing that makes the classic unseen examination paper in an exam the only mode of doing that. And so while the number of modes of assessment will be more restricted in 2021, I think that's a very helpful idea for a number of reasons, both operational and to do with integrity. I think the majority of programs will adopt, or a considerable number of programs at least will adopt, some form of managed open book, limited time, but not 3 hours, limited time examination. And once you accept that are doing and will have access to resources to help them straight their learning, then I think that can be built into the academic assessment design. And so I think there are some real positives to come out of this pandemic, as well as all the pain and misery. And I have to say, the University of London staff worked, the operational staff worked over and beyond to get that operation delivered in 2020. It was an extraordinary achievement. I mean, the complexity of it, you've only got to think, look, just remind yourselves of the numbers that were involved. The complexity of doing that in 180 countries was and across so many programs was enormous. But I think there have been, recognising the pain, there have been some positives.
Thanks, Alan. I know my colleagues at the University of London will very much appreciate that. Drilling into that a little bit more, there were a number of questions around accessibility and so on. So I think you mentioned at the beginning that you know, there were high levels of take-up of the exam, in fact higher than the normal rate of going into exam centres and doing a pen and paper exam. But can you say anything from the results about students who may have had a declared disability or special examination arrangements? Do you have any details on that?
I'm afraid I don't. As you say, the number of students who chose to take examinations in the 2020 season was marginally above the number in the 2019 season. So there's absolutely no evidence at all that students were not able to take their exams and therefore to gain their qualifications because of this move online. And of course, you're dealing with a particular social segment in University of London students around the world, students who do have access to technology, even though they have a lot of challenges in some places with internet availability. But in Stylianos and I also managed interviews with a number of students, and I remember a number of students, in particular 1 or 2 women students, who said how enormously pleased they were not to have to make very stressful, long, and in some cases dangerous journeys to exam halls in cities a long way from where they lived, having to stay overnight with some of the social and cultural challenges that represented for them, and to be able to sit the examination in their own home. They thought that was a great step forward for them. So while the challenges of the online world for some forms of disability are well known, and we should pay attention to those, it's also worth remembering that some people will be positively liberated by this freedom from having to travel and make difficult journeys, sometimes quite dangerous.
And the only thing I would like to add to Alan's comprehensive answer, Linda, was that this does not mean that the students who undertook online assessment in the summer of 2020 had not support needs. They had support needs, and they had significant support needs, and that's what came out of the survey while talking to the students. However, it was very important that the university responded by creating all this structure of support, by providing webinars, training events, workshops, and for instance, those who asked the question through a webinar, very interesting, was the ones that were most likely to be satisfied to the quality and the speed of inquiry response. So this, in response to the question, gave some very clear ideas about what kind of response back from the university, what kind of support is more useful, more timely, and more likely to satisfy the needs of the students, including those with special needs.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Just to say, if the audience were interested, we will be publishing the full, well, a good summary of the report from the evaluation at the University of London on the University of London CDE website, so people will be able to grab into some of the findings that colleagues have shared here. There are a lot of questions and a lot of discussion in the Q&A panel, and we have one of the CDE fellows, Claire, who will write a report on this event, and I'm hoping that she'll be able to summarise some of those strands of discussion that are running parallel to the verbal discussion here. I'm going to move on to Simon, and we recognise that there's a number of themes there that are coming up in the panel. I know Simon will have been looking at those and will also be picking up on some of those, and hopefully at the end we'll be able to do a bit more there. So Simon, if I might turn to you now and welcome you to present to us. Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes, brilliantly, and we can see you. Oh, well, I can see you. I think the audience will see you in a moment.
Okay, so well, first of all, my thanks to you, Linda, Tim, and Kim and Eric, really for all the work in putting these events on. They're so important in helping us to make sense of kind of what we're experiencing, and of course learning from and with each other. So thank you for that. And I was very interested to hear what Stylianos and Alan were doing at the University of London, because I think we've been doing very similar sorts of things, and our concerns are very similar. If you can go to the next slide, please, Eric. Yeah, okay. So the session's entitled, what will assessment look like this year? And I suppose the quick answer is, well, actually it will look very much the same as last year, because last year was when we did the pivot. The year before, though, it was totally different. And I think we had a very traditional approach to assessment, large exam hall, invigilated for centrally managed exams, and of course that changed. We pivoted to online using Moodle. So I think that last year, I mean April, May, June, after lockdown, was an absolute kind of crisis point for us for teaching, learning, assessment. We've come out of that reasonably successfully, I think. But there is a saying in English that one should never waste a crisis. And I think that we used our crisis really to accelerate a lot of the things that we'd wanted to do for some time, but never really thought that we would get the opportunity to do it. UCL is a very, very large, really large institution. It moves very, very slowly. A lot of power in the faculties. So getting anything sort of moved across the institution is hard to do, I think. So what I thought I would do in this session is just to share the journey that we've been on with you, and then to kind of look at some of the kind of more longer term type of vision sort of ideas. I've subtitled this slide, is the genie out of the bottle? And by what I mean by that is the sort of genie of large scale, long term digital assessment transformation as part of an overarching vision for assessment. So that's my kind of theme that runs through. Could you go to the next slide, please? So yeah, in terms of what's changed, so as I mentioned, we're a very large institution. We had something like 450,000 assessment instances in 2019-20, I suppose. And of these, 20% were traditional exams, so the 2,500 centrally managed exams with about 87,000 candidatures. And following lockdown and the pivot to online assessment using Moodle, that was drastically reduced. So we ended up with, again, like Alan and Stylianos and University of London, going to mostly open book exams. And we did other things like, all first year exams were converted into capstone exams, and they weren't examined in the normal way. So this year, it's interesting because I think when you think, well, what does the new normal look like? People are possibly desperate to get back to that normal. They're struggling. They're tired. They're fatigued, and they might want to go back to normal. We're seeing some of that. So there is a kind of a return, I think, to exams, but they will be again open book, 24 open book with a timed window within that. But we are seeing a return to that. Could you go to the next slide, please, Anna? And I was kind of intrigued. This is a report from Williams and Lowendahl in a Gartner report, which I thought was quite interesting, because when you're trying to talk to colleagues about, let's find a kind of a proper assessment platform, to do that, you're often sort of confronted with why do we need to kind of change? And I feel that this is something, it is, for me anyway, it's the kind of final frontier of education. It's a digital assessment. And could you go to the next slide, please? And I think that there's a software solution to this, and that's the one I'm going to talk now about. But I think there's also, really sort of entrenched other deep things which we need to kind of change. So I think in terms of the software solution, this time, more or less this time last year, a small group of us went to visit Brunel University, who were, I think, probably leading in terms of the adoption of an e-exams piece of software in the UK anyway. And we went to see their operation. They were in a sports hall, face-to-face, invigilated, and they were bringing in their devices. And that was one of the sort of drivers for us to think about, well, how do we, this last frontier, how do we modernize and transform the assessment experience for students? Because, we were hearing a lot from students, and over a number of years we've been hearing, why do we have to do these written exams, 2-3 hours? We're totally unused to writing. We have to practice to build writing by hand, to build the muscles up in our arms, otherwise we're fatigued. And of course, Mark is also saying, I can barely read the script by the time someone's finished writing for 3 hours, and they're unused to writing, and their writing's terrible, and all those sorts of things. So I think that there was a sense, yes, we needed to move that on, and we ended up after that to writing a paper saying we would like to run this project. We think there is an appetite for this, and little did we know, of course, the tsunami that was going to wash across us, and we very quickly, following lockdown, got the answer, go ahead and procure a system. If you could go to the next slide, please. So this is what we did. We set up some groups, a project board for this. We had a very effective, and we have a very effective collaborative project together with our information systems delivery group, the faculties, central units, including the ARENA Centre for Research-Based Education, Digital Education, and the exams office as well. And we've been working very hard since more or less since June to gather all the requirements we wanted for looking at a number of different providers, choosing the provider, and then testing that. And we're now in a position where we have procured that very, very large scale complex platform, and we will roll this out to all students this year. So that's the big difference, that students will be taking their exams on a brand new platform, which has been, I would say it's been tested, but not absolutely tested to its. So we've been very cautious about the things that we are doing on it. Our sort of experience was, well, our vision, I suppose, is that we're looking for an end-to-end platform, so you could do authoring, delivery, marking, moderation, external examining, and of course, in terms of the sort of the benefits, the efficiencies of scale that you get, is the sort of the integration. So if we could reduce some of the shadow systems that people keep around sort of marks and the recording of the assessments and the work that they do behind that before they upload, that would be something that would definitely be a kind of a win. It's absolutely a piece of low-hanging fruit. And what we found actually was that the systems that are out there are really very mature. Particularly Scandinavia, we found, have been doing a lot of work around this, and the universities have moved, obviously this year, into online assessment. But their systems weren't really aligned to a UK understanding of assessment, or is a different understanding. And some of the terminology was different, some of the approaches were different to that. So I think there's still a lot of kind of development to do that, but I can say that we have a system in place now. If you can go to the next slide, please. We have a number of different phases. So before we get to the kind of phase 2, which is the sort of business as normal phase, this is what we did. We had this requirements gathering, identified the platforms, shortlisting, initial testing, and then we went into this quite rigorous proof of concept, December and January, where we engaged about 40 academics to test the system, to try and kind of break it, to use all the assessments they would have done normally. And we also had the maths department, they volunteered 460 of their students to come on and do live exams in January. So actually we're in a really good position to sort of have testing of a lot of assessments across a lot of subject areas and have the student experience as well. So if you can go on to the next, I think there's little animations now of things that we've completed. So can you go on to the next one? And the next one, and the next one. Yeah, so these are the things we've completed. So I'll talk a little bit about the experience of the proof of concept now. So you can go on to the next one, please. Yeah, so as I mentioned, this was the testing. These were the assessment methods that we tested, and these are the subject areas we tested. So again, what we felt was that software companies we know will promise an awful lot, but actually it doesn't always, what they say on the box doesn't always ring as true as we would like it to be. So of course, one of the things we needed to do was to test the integration with that, to make sure that all of that can kind of work effectively. If you can go on to the next slide, please. So that was a success factor. We passed that. I won't read these out or get you to read them. I know the writing is very, very small, but you can maybe pick this up in the slides afterwards. If you can press the next one, the general impression was basically it's all good. A few glitches. If you can go on to the next one, please. Thank you. So comments from students again was pretty good. The math students who sat it, and this is kind of one we were very constrained about the type of assessment that we set. If you can go on to the next slide and the next one, please. again, this was basically pretty positive. And the next slide, please. But I think one of the things that I've been working for quite a long time as a piece of educational development has been around, do we really understand what our kind of issues are, and can the kind of a software solution really help with this? If you can go on to the next slide, please. And that's a piece of work which I think probably we should all be doing. And one of the things that I was, I think the software solution can resolve certain things, but it also opens up a range of other kind of issues that probably remain unresolved for us. So things that Alan and Stylianos were talking about the kind of design of learning outcomes and the kind of, the constructive alignment really with those learning outcomes, with the right type of assessment, the sort of authenticity of assessment, the academic conduct of students doing those assessments. All those things need to be brought in, but also that sort of sense about do we understand really what students are wanting from their assessments? How do we continue to make that relevant to them, given the student body is changing? There's lots of things around there about them that are changing, and in order to stay relevant, we need to make those changes as well. So my sense is that we need to have a lot of consultation around this, but also we need some sort of scholarly approach to this. If you can go to the next slide, please.
1 more minute.
Oh, okay. So this is I love this quote by David Bowd about academics often not thinking about assessment till the kind of end, and one of the things I'd like to do is to get them to think about that much sooner. If you can go to the next slide, please. So this is some work which is through an approach called Tester, which we did. This was over a 5-year period, running through 157 programs, a couple of data analysts full-time on this work, finding out. And by far in advance, the thing that they found were, the top 10, if you like, were these things. And I think online assessment platforms can help in some ways, but assessment design, as Alan and Stylianos were talking about, is key to this, and the sort of development of assessment literacy is absolutely key to this, so students understand what the expectations are. Next slide, please. I'll go through these relatively quickly. Again, we did some work last year before lockdown. These are the sorts of things that students said, which tie in very well, I think, to that work that we did around Tester. Next slide, please. And one of the tools that we've been using at UCL is this a sort of visualization tool. So on this, you can see a spread of assessments across a program. This is the student experience of assessment. You can see here the load of assessment is high on that one. You might understand why there's cheating that goes on. A lot of contract cheating sites are very successful in this, I think, for this reason. But also the type of assessment, diversity of assessment, where there's formatives or little triangles, and how they relate. Go on to the next one, please. These sorts of things can really stimulate discussion, but also things around sort of guidance around, really helping staff to think through what are my alternatives to exams, given that the exams still, particularly for research-intensive universities, the kind of predominant form. Next slide, please. And then thinking through things like the student load. So are there some sort of guidance around how academics should be designing their assessments? And again, I think this is something which, given COVID, we need to constantly kind of come back to, because we may need to be doing things in very different ways. I think this is the last slide. Yeah, so just very quickly in summary, sort of around the Genie, I think the things that we've learned is, yes, a software solution will change. Certainly our assessment will look very different to what it has looked like, and we will continue to kind of innovate and hopefully have the benefits of online assessment and all that brings. But also I think we need to go back and do some really basic kind of work around how we design assessments, how we work with students on assessments, and how those assessments will fit into a kind of an online digital assessment platform, not digital exams platform. thank you very much for listening. Next slide is just a thank you, questions, and then there's a list of references, I think, on the final slide. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Simon. Excellent, and I feel there was a really nice synergy between the two talks we've had today. So thank you, colleagues, for that. Simon, much of the discussion in the Q&A has continued along the lines that it started with, and that makes sense because these are what's the future going to look like, and some of the challenges that were picked up with Alan and Stylianos have carried on through there. One of the ones I wanted to perhaps ask you about is where you see the role of AI possibly intersecting with what you'll do at UCL or perhaps more generally in the sector.
Yeah, one of my colleagues talks about this project is a sort of carrying a Ming vase across an ice rink, and that sort of sense about, you know, this, yeah, it provides some solution, but as we know, there's a lot of platform fatigue, and also all the other things which come into play around online proctoring, AI, analytics, all those other things. I mean, again, I think that genie is probably out of the bottle. We will, I'm sure that we will be using AI, but I do think that we need to very strongly consult with colleagues and our students about that. At UCL, we took a very early decision. There would be no online proctoring. We are also, as part of this development, looking at a project around cheating in a remote platform as well, and our supplier is very happy to work with us. So we will be doing some work around that to see, you know, what works and what doesn't work. And I think that's a piece of work. Someone like Phil Dawson, who many of you probably know, has been doing a lot of work around that. And I think that that's something that we don't fully understand yet. I think we need to step very, very cautiously into that area. As Alan and Stylianos were talking about, I think that for me it's about the sort of design of assessments, which is the most important thing. But I do appreciate, I'm not a quantitative, don't come from a quantitative discipline background myself, but I think that, you know, how do you design kind of authentic assessment, open book assessments, where there may or may not be a right and a wrong answer. That's kind of more difficult maybe than thinking through how you might design more kind of reflective open book exams, which maybe pick up on things that you've learned inside a particular, you know, lecture or in a workplace or something like that. So my sense is that this won't go away. I think those companies that are providing the online tools are developing those analytics all the time. I think there probably will be some sort of use of those things. I think we can't also neglect, you know, PSRB requirements and things for some kind of invigilation. But I do think you know, that we may in time return back to a situation where we will have face-to-face invigilated exams, but at least they will be, you know, students, we will have gone some way, I think, to enabling students to bring their own devices in using lockdown browsers and doing those assessments at least on their own devices. So I think there will be, you know, I think it's a very interesting kind of picture, but I think it could go in lots of different ways.
That's really interesting, Simon, actually, because a couple of the questions that have come through as you've been speaking have been about, you know, why did you choose not to have online proctoring coming up? But actually, if what you're saying is that perhaps in a longer term, post-COVID, there will be a move back to some invigilated in-person, in-a-room exams. Yeah, I think are there any other reasons for not proctoring at this point?
No, I think it's all the sort of privacy things, which I think probably people know about. How do you actually do it effectively when you've got students working in their bedrooms often, or, you know, in noisy backgrounds. That seems to be something that we haven't really dealt with effectively, and I think we're going to have to take some kind of hit around that one. But I think there was a very interesting report from SURF, which is the Dutch educational, which I'm sure that you've looked at as well, which I think is very interesting, questioning, you know, what's the value really of doing sort of online large exam hall exams? Large exam hall exams, individual exams, when their education is moving in kind of different ways. So I think the vision and the mission of higher education may change, and I suspect that's probably most universities are having those discussions about what does the future look like for us, what will change, what will stay the same, what will be the new normal. I know it's something which is bandied around all the time and it may be losing meaning now.
Yeah, there was actually an early question on the panel, which I sort of saved towards the end, because I think it really picks up on what you've just said, Simon, which was, I'm sort of paraphrasing because I just wrote it down and I'll never find it in the panel now, but it said something like, what does assessment look like beyond online exams and written assessment? And there was a question about the use of portfolios and other types of approaches, I guess, to gathering evidence. Have you got some experience of that? Is some of that going to be coming up for your summer 2021 with your students at UCL?
Yeah, we've done quite a lot of work on that. So one of the very first thing that we did actually when we realised we could no longer do the traditional exams was we produced that guidance. I think one of my slides had that in, produced guidance about alternative. And we've had, I mean, it's a 50-page document, I think, where we've looked at particular types of assessment. It's based on Sally Brown's work. I don't know if many of you will probably know that. And it's sort of it interpreted in a kind of digital way. And I think we will come back and do some more work on that one. But we're also looking now at sort of forms of digital feedback as well. So things around how do you engage students effectively in your online teaching through formative assessment, so maybe sort of quick formative assessments, but also we're introducing this concept of gateway formatives, which is that sort of design of formative assessments that have a very strong link to summative assessment. And we're developing some patterns around the relationship between formative and summative as a way of trying to sort of represent that, I guess, and hopefully we'll let you have that sight of that at some point.
Excellent. I think we'll have to get you back, Simon, to hear more about that. I think that's some of the really exciting innovations, and certainly in the discussion there and in discussions across the sector, we know that this is a remarkable opportunity to really consider what the purpose of assessment is and how we want to deliver it. Absolutely. There were some quite sort of technical questions in the panel that were around how the platform interfaces with the student management system and so on. I recognise that you're not going to be able to work on those, but there was a particular theme that I'd like to invite Alan and Stylianos perhaps to step back into as well, just for the last couple of minutes. And it's been the question of the use of text matching software. And I guess that, there were some particular questions about what's the right similarity score, and there's been some discussion there. But I think that question of the issue of should the work be the person's own, or is it reasonable for them to quote from other sources? Is that something that you're thinking about at UCL? And Alan and Stylianos, did you want to comment on that as well? That question of using other resources in open book digital type assessment.
Well, I'll kick off while we wait for others to form their thoughts. Their thoughts may be a bit more coherent than mine if that take a moment or two. I feel like that old joke. I'm not sure I'd want to start from there, Linda, but I recognise we have to start from here. I think it would be much more beneficial if we managed to reverse out of thinking how do we police and discipline assessment to how do we use assessment for the purposes of supporting student learning and judging their performance so that they can have a qualification that means something for the future. So it's not that plagiarism isn't a problem now, whether it's plagiarism in the sense of unacknowledged use of resources, which can of course be a matter of academic naivety as well as deliberate intent to be dishonest. It can be the use of the essay mills that Simon mentioned, which of course Turnitin wouldn't necessarily spot. It can be the question of personation, where you get somebody else to go in and sit an examination in your place, or to write essays for you in your place. So all of those questions are, all of those issues are issues that arise because of the approach to end of course assessment that we have engineered. And so while I don't pretend for a second that they don't have to be managed, I think rethinking how we plan assessment and what it's for and its educational purposes is going to be, at least in the medium term, perhaps more quickly, a much more fruitful approach than getting Turnitin and Proctoring, etc., more widely used or better used. I don't know whether that people would think that's an impossibly liberal or approach. I'd be interested to hear what colleagues say in the Q&A and what colleagues say in the panel.
Simon, do you have a UCL response or a personal response to that provocation from Alan?
I'll see. Can I see what other people have said?
Absolutely. But I mean, I think that this builds on much of what we've already been talking about, really. And you know, your gatekeeper assessment is formative gatekeeper assessment activities are again in that direction, aren't they? They're about the idea of continuous assessment for learning, assessment as learning, going throughout the module, and we know that that helps to reduce the issues of personation in particular, because you get to know the student work and so on. And I think opportunities for AI to play a part in that will be valuable as we move forward. Okay, so we've had Stylianos, did you want to add anything to that discussion, or Simon?
No, the only other thing I would like to say is that in education, particularly in other kind of professions, the holy grail is technology, in our case educational technology, and we dream of the day that educational technology is going to help us or liberate us from quite a lot of the menial tasks, including authenticating people's work, our students' contributions, matching performance to somebody's profile, and all this kind of thing. I find that this is a very, very significant problem. However, in the meantime, until AI tools become fit for purpose, I think designing authentic assessment, putting our emphasis in providing decent assessment opportunities to our students is the key priority.
Thank you. I think we're probably going to have to end there because we've finished our time. But Stylianos, I think you've given us a very, very good closing point. And to just pick up something that was in the discussion as well is the emphasis on high stakes assessment that we're seeing throughout our assessment systems, picking up on what Alan said there. Well, colleagues, it's been an absolutely fantastic and very, very interesting session. Thank you to our presenters, Alan, Stylianos and Simon. It was brilliant to have you here. We do look forward to inviting you back to hear more about these developments, perhaps in 6 months' time, to see where we are then. Thank you to my colleagues at the University of London Institute in Paris and at Goldsmiths for working with the Centre for Distance Education on this series. And just to say that nicely picking up on some of the themes today, our next session on the 4th of March at 2 o'clock, not 1:30, at 2 o'clock GMT, will be looking at perspectives in inclusive online education. So we will be picking up on some of the access and so on issues that we've seen. We look forward to seeing you then. We'll make sure that you've got the invitation to the event and that you've got a report on this event and a link to the video for this event today. Thank you very much for your time and for your engagement and for the dialogues that you've had. Many thanks.